Over the course of the last couple of weeks, I have been invited to two Second Amendment events. Not that those are unusual in Idaho, but I'd like to thank the people for extending the invitation. It reminds us that we still have a lot of people who have to get seriously involved in protecting what is a God-given constitutional right, and that is the right to bear arms. In other words, for your own self-defense. I bring this up because just in the last couple of weeks, we've had a candidate for president who's been rambling on and on about gun confiscation. You have a court that as well has said that gun manufacturers can be sued for selling firearms that were later used in the commission of crimes, one of those being the school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. And as we vilify the guns instead of the people who actually are holding the firearms, it sometimes, we lose track of what the real issue is, and that is self-defense is not only a priority, but it is often a necessity. And a good guy with a gun can often stop a bad guy who has a gun or sometimes even a knife. You may have heard the story this morning on the news at some point or over the course of last night about a fellow who went on a rampage with a knife, by the way, and we don't have knife control in this country, and no one is suggesting apparently that we do. Man went on a rampage with a knife and a killing spree. It seemed to be at random, and then he was stopped by a good guy with a gun. This is a reporter speaking, just a few seconds for a little bit of flavor on this. This is a reporter from New England Cable News offering some details about what happened in Massachusetts.
Mass State Police say 2 of the victims are now dead. It's unclear if they were the victims in the mall or the house. The suspect, after crashing a black car into the front door of Macy's, was shot dead by an off-duty police officer. Eyewitnesses say a pregnant woman was one of the victims stabbed, and they say it happened inside the Bertucci's restaurant.
So this guy went running into a restaurant. He'd broken into a home, killed an old woman, stabbed somebody else at the home, took off in a car, goes to the mall, goes racing into the mall after crashing the car, runs into a restaurant and just starts stabbing people, including a man he killed after stabbing him. And there's an off-duty police officer there who actually is carrying apparently a pistol. And bang! The whole thing comes to an abrupt end. Now, if more people, more good guys, were armed in that situation, perhaps someone would have stopped this kook even earlier and would have eliminated the threat. And I know lefty out there is saying, oh, but no, guns are so awful and so bad. Now you have, again, evidence of what can happen when someone stands in the way of a criminal and says, no more, stop, end, fini. A couple of weeks ago, we shared with you a story about an 11-year-old boy was at his family's home alone when some neighbor broke into the house. A fellow he actually knew. Neighbor is a methamphetamine addict, and the neighbor was robbing some of their goods, encountered the little boy and threatened to kill him. The little boy grabbed a firearm and bam, he brought the guy down. And he said the guy cried like a little baby, blubbering away after having been incapacitated and then arrested. He was not killed, but he was taken down because the little boy knew how to use a firearm, and he was telling a reporter at the time, he said, look, I've had training already. My dad taught me how to do this. There you go. It comes down to a little common sense in these situations. And then we have this. This is coming out of the Washington Times. I didn't get to this yesterday, but I did want to mention it before we wrapped up the week, and I think it goes along with our discussion right now. How does suing a gun manufacturer or retailer stop gun violence? It won't. Gun manufacturers shouldn't be held liable for the actions of criminals. Criminals should be held accountable instead. Gabriella Hoffman, I don't know a lot about her, but I think I will read more of her work. She writes, this urgency to target gun manufacturers and retailers comes on the heels of a recent court ruling allowing the families of 9 Sandy Hook Elementary School victims to proceed with a case against Remington Arms, which made the Bushmaster AR-15 rifle model used by mass murderer Adam Lanza. And again, Lanza was a kook as well, and if somebody else had been armed there and had been there quickly, Adam Lanza would have never gotten away with this, with at least the scope of the crime, the absolute carnage that he got away with. Someone would have taken the little, well, I almost questioned his legitimacy, but they would have taken him down right away, and a lot of lives would have been saved. It's 8:12. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com, and I welcome you to our program this morning. Dr. Jonathan Tripp will be joining us in about 20 minutes, talking food poisoning today. Now, in the summer months, a lot of people are having picnics, and that's always a concern. How long is the mayonnaise setting out in the sun? But we have a number of actually issues we're going to talk about related to food poisoning. We've had some of the news recently because of certain salad fixings and the like that may have been contaminated. So he'll be addressing some of those issues. Also, Ruth Pierce will join us after the 9 o'clock news. She's one of the newest members of the Twin Falls City Council, talking about how liberals, especially people like Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, they're traipsing the country, and they're talking about sending grown men into little girls' toilets. They're talking about sending students into, high school boys into the locker rooms with high school girls. Recipe for disaster there. And they're talking about taking away your firearms. All of these issues, these culture war issues that they're going to hammer away at this year, is because they have no economic answers. They just would like to add to the overall debt that this country has. Even some of their own fellow travelers are beginning to realize it may be a prescription this year for disaster. Chris Matthews at MSDNC moaning about that very point last night.
Working on this project about the early elections in 50s and 60s and the Kennedy races, and I have to tell you, back then being a Democrat was great. You talked about unemployment, you talked about jobs, you talked about putting people to work, you talked about minimum wage, you talked about Medicare. Now you got to talk about guns, which the people don't want to hear. You got to talk about how coal is bad for the country and bad for the world. You got to talk about same-sex in a part of the country that isn't too keen on that kind of cultural stuff. Religion. Abortion. So all of a sudden you're talking about things that aren't really well received. But in the old days, a Democrat could just say a lot of poverty here, let's do something about it.
In other words, as I said a couple of weeks ago, it's a bridge too far. They've decided that they had won a lot of victories, and now they wanted to turn it into a rout. And they're realizing that the American people aren't necessarily on board with all of them. And I'm telling you right now, the polling numbers, we've been told over the last several months there is simply no way Donald Trump could ever beat the Democrat nominee, whomever that would be. But the polling numbers this week have been absolutely startling. I mentioned it yesterday. I had Morning Joe on before I came to work on Tuesday morning. And the cast and crew of that program, overwhelmingly liberal, they were absolutely stunned by new polling data that shows Donald Trump has pulled into a statistical dead heat nationwide with Hillary Clinton. And to follow this up, could defeat her in several swing states. And that would flip those electoral votes. Those are the key. 4 or 5 states, sometimes maybe just 3, will turn this election and turn it in Donald Trump's favor. And Trump, by the way, did very, very well in West Virginia yesterday. If you didn't notice, he won 4 out of the 5 votes cast. You've still got a couple of other guys on the ballot, even though they aren't actively campaigning. 4 out of 5 votes. Where Bernie Sanders won on the Democrat side, but only with 51%. Still, he had a 14 percentage point lead over Hillary Clinton. She's not popular with the coal industry. That includes the people who actually mine the coal. And in neighboring Ohio, they're still impacted by the coal industry. And in Kentucky and Indiana, they're impacted by the coal industry. I'm telling you, folks, all of these predictions that Donald Trump cannot win a general election are being proven false already. Now, I had said a few weeks ago on the program, Ronald Reagan was down 18 points in 1980 at this time of year to Jimmy Carter. Carter had already even botched the Iranian rescue situation, and Ronald Reagan was still down 18 points. We were experiencing inflation that was nearly running at 18%, called stagflation at the time. We had 444 Americans, or no, was it 150 Americans held for 444 days by Iran. All of these situations were going on, and it still looked like Carter was going to win re-election. And we got through the summer, and Reagan was still behind. We got into the fall, and all of a sudden, Reagan just surged ahead, and Jimmy Carter was toast. So when you hear your liberal friends snickering in the background telling you that this is going to be a cakewalk, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, too, because they're discussing ways to spend all of your money. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, Wall Street Journal has an editorial today pointing out Mrs. Clinton rolled out her latest proposal Tuesday, which is meant to make child care more affordable for working parents and also to raise the wages of child care workers. Now, how do you go about doing that? All right, child care is expensive, and you've got to have licensed providers, and they're not getting paid a lot of money. Okay, so the government will come along and say, well, tell you what, if you can't afford it, we'll pay for it, meaning the taxpayers of America. And then you turn around and you say, oh, and by the way, these people who are in child care are not making enough money, So we'll have the taxpayers pay them some more. What are the savings in all of this? Because if you're a parent, you're still paying taxes, aren't you? So if your taxes go up to pay for all of this, how is this? It's a little bit like an old analogy that I trot out every once in a while. You get up, say you're a gentleman, right? You get up some morning and you realize you've done something very ungentlemanly. That is, you've forgotten that it's your wife's birthday, and at the last minute you realize you don't have a present for her. So before you rush off to work, you go over to the closet, you open the closet, and you take out one of her existing blouses. And you put that blouse in a box. And then you wrap that box up, and you go down at breakfast as she's making your breakfast, slaving in the kitchen, and you hand her the box and say, "Happy birthday, honey, and thank you for all of your hard work." And she opens the box, and she's going to look in there, and she's going to see it's the same old shirt. She is not going to throw her arms around you, tell you that she loves you, and gives you a great big kiss. It's not going to happen. In fact, she might sock you with a skillet. It's the same thing with someone coming along saying, "We've got a program that will take care of that and pay for that." What they're simply doing is they're recycling your money, just like you would recycle a gift. 818, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Bill, yesterday you guys were talking about how it costs $8,000 per household. What nobody did say is 50% of those households aren't working and are collecting themselves.
Yeah.
So you just increased 8,000 to 16 on the workers, while the people that don't work are getting their house paid for by the other people.
Yeah, it's just simply robbing one person and giving it to another for that second person's vote.
Right, exactly. And it's just like these guns, and you're gazing in the bathrooms. It's their agenda, therefore it's being pushed forward. They want to sue the gun manufacturers and everything else. If you actually went and looked it up, I bet you more people die in drunk driving accidents than being shot. But nobody's talking about getting rid of a gun.
Well,
I mean, a car, But it's the guy yesterday stabbed a bunch of people. You don't hear him talking about getting rid of the knives. Again, the guy was mentally ill. But as soon as a gun's involved, they blame the tool, not the person.
Hey, I got to let you on that note. Thank you, though, for the telephone call and the input. Dr. Tripp coming up in about 15 minutes. We'll be talking food poisoning. He's from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Remember the old Archie Bunker line when Gloria is arguing with him about gun control, and she cites some figure of the number of people who were killed by handguns the previous year, and he looks at her and he says, "Would it make you feel any better if they was pushed out of windows?" Loved it. Hey, we've got 43 right now, on our way nearly 70 before the day is over. Chris Matthews is not the only fellow traveler concerned that the Democrats could blow it this year at the presidential level. One of his formerly a member of MSDNC, is also joining in that chorus today, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. I do want to remind folks we're looking at temperatures perhaps near 90 on Friday, and if you haven't, you may have kickstarted the AC already. You should have to see if it's working, but if you have an issue, you need to get in touch with the folks at Ramsey Heating and Electric. The summer heat is right around the corner. Whether you need repairs right away or just would like to avoid problems in the future, call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. Make sure the job is done right the first time and set yourself up for a great summer. You can see them, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley, or give them a telephone call, 678-0459. That's 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric. They sell warm winters and cool summers at Ramsey Heating and Electric. We have a couple of folks looking to reach us during the course of the program today, and you're up next. You're on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Bill, it's not just bad guys that we have to worry about. It's animals like maybe a mountain lion or a bear or a pit bull with rabies.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to be made. I think that people out there realize if you live in a place like Idaho, you're dealing with a lot of wildlife, and that wildlife can be somewhat, I'm not saying it comes and threatens you, but if it gets encountered by you and it it has that fight-flight reaction, and it decides on fight, you got a problem, especially if it's a big furry thing, kind of like me. Well, I need to shave a little bit more often. 8:25, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This guy's name is Cenk Uygur. I think that's how he pronounces it. I may have insulted him in the past by calling it something else, but he used to work at MSDNC. He now has his own website, and he... All right, he's just doing daily podcasts. He's fallen far, let's put it that way. But he seems to be, for a liberal, a fairly intelligent guy. He was a conservative, actually, when he was younger. Don't know what happened along the line. But he says Republicans don't like Hillary Clinton, overwhelmingly. And he says things are getting worse among her own kind.
Now, when it comes to independents, she polls very poorly. But the context of this story is, how is she doing in retaining the support of her own party? And the answer is very poorly. Okay, so let me show you the Gallup numbers. Back in October, November, her favorability among Democrats was great. It was plus 63. Now, that's in her own party, and she's a Clinton, which is obviously a big part of the Democratic Party. So, but still, a great number, right? Now, in April, plus 36. So that has dropped significantly. A 27-point drop ain't nothing to mess with.
As she lost to Bernie Sanders again. And Sanders was speaking in Salem, Oregon last night. He feels he'll win in Oregon next week as well as in Kentucky. He may be done, but I'll tell you what, he's going to batter her pretty well before the actual nominating convention.
Let me be as clear as I can be. We are in this campaign to win the Democratic nomination. And we are going to fight for every last vote. What the people of West Virginia said tonight, and I believe the people of Oregon and Kentucky will say next week, is that we need an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Let me begin by giving you all some pretty good news.
Is it Bernie's age, or I'm just wondering why he talks in such a slow fashion? We are going to... Probably some bureaucrat here in Idaho will have to apologize for insulting him. You may have heard that story on the news. Topic for another day. 8:28, Bill Colley with you. One of my radio predecessors here, Mike Payne, sends this along. He says, on money, you give your child money for chores done. A week later, you borrow the money back. The next week, you pay again for the chores done and borrow that again the following week. That's how government works. I think he's spot on with all of that. Sounds like my Uncle Frank, who always wanted to borrow from the kids. He would come home after a few weeks on the road in his truck. And this was back in the mid-1970s, and he was making $30,000 a year. You're talking a lot of money back in that age. And within a few days of being home, he'd be like hitting us all up for money. My cousin Mike and me and everybody else in the family, he'd be walking around saying, hey, can I borrow $5? And then when I got old enough to drive, can I borrow your car? Very much Uncle Frank sometimes seemed like a Democrat. We've got a break shortly. I do want to mention Dr. Jonathan Tripp will be popping up with us in just a few minutes, and we're talking food poisoning for the next half hour. And some of you may have some experience with that. I had it once just after Thanksgiving about 25 years ago. And I'm telling you right now, it's not anything that I would wish upon anyone. I missed an entire football game between Oklahoma and Nebraska that I really wanted to see because I was confined to another room of the house for the entirety of the ball game. And the rest of the weekend, I was absolutely dehydrated because of that. That's on the way in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX. At newsradio1310.com, and you're listening to Top Story.